Hi, this is Everett's Watercolors. Welcome to my classroom. Now today I'm going to show you a little study I did the other day. I went outside and did a on location plein air sketch of a landscape area. Then I brought it back to the studio and I transferred that sketch to a piece of watercolor paper. Now I think you'll find that transfer of a drawing to watercolor paper very, very interesting. And then I did a small painting. So let's go to my painting table and let's get started. This was a photograph of the area that I looked at. This was it gave me a nice avenue into pathway into the painting. It has some dark values, and then it has an interesting little background, which is where the eye want to go. So I've designed my painting plan on this sketchbook. And what I've done, I've marked off a 4 inches long by 3 inches high, and then I blocked out what I want to have as my dark areas and the light areas. So I got my darks and light value here on this sketch. I've also divided it into thirds. I got a line here and a line here, which is dividing it vertically into thirds. And I've also got a line across here and here, dividing this into thirds. Then I have a 140-pound painting my painting pad. There's a 140-pound watercolor paper, and this was 4 by 3. I measured this out to be a 6 by 8. And I've also marked off this into thirds, putting a sketch here. So I have a grid on this line and a grid here. Is I'm going to transfer the sketch over here to the pad. And by a grid, I have a way of getting exactly where the marks are. So I have a proportion of what I saw, what I sketched onto the painting. I'm going to go ahead and draw this on, then I'll come back and show you the next step. I want to get the same proportions as my sketch onto my painting pad, 140-pound watercolor paper. So I put the grids in here, and I've gone ahead and I transferred the drawing here to the watercolor pad, 140-pound watercolor paper. You can see the drawing I've done. And what I've done is I've just transferred the basic shapes that I want to put in there. Now, and I'm going to mix up. I'm going to start with now in watercolors, I'm going to start with the lightest color, and I'm going to start with the roadway, because that's where in my sketch. Now from now on, I don't even look at the photograph. The photograph I put aside. I don't follow the photograph. There's too much detail there. But here I'm going to follow my painting plan, which is my sketch, and I have my lights and darks already worked out. So the light area is going to be the roadway. So I'm going to start with the roadway as my lights. And I'm going to use a little bit of, I've got a mixture here of lemon yellow, yellow ochre, and a little burnt sienna to start out with. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the lightest color, which is the yellow lemon, with a little bit of yellow ochre, just a little bit. I'm going to start back here. This area here, actually this is the roadway back here. So I'm going to start out here with the yellow right in here. And this area here, which is a building back in the trees, I'm going to start getting the yellow, a little bit of brown up in there. This is the lightest color in the painting right here. This is what attracted me to the scene when I first saw it, when I painted this up. I sketched this out. Okay, now I'm going to start coming forward now. And as I come forward with this lighter, I'm going to pick up a little more. Here's a little bit of yellow ochre, so I'm coming forward. I'm going to get a little bit darker as I come forward. And I can overlap some of this because I know it's going to be, that area is going to be a little bit darker. It's in shadow, so it doesn't matter. So as I come forward, I got a little bit darker. A little bit darker in value. A little bit duller. So less detail as I come forward. So we're going to be blocking in a lot of these values that I see here. Okay, now the next area, the next lighter area, or not lightest, but the next light area is going to be the this little bit of grass over here. So I'm going to put a little bit, I'm going to put a touch of green, and I'm going to dull it down with a little bit of yellow ochre, a little bit of burnt sienna, and because I don't want that to be pure paint, but I want that to be a green color that looks like the grass. Again, I'm going to start here. This is a lighter value here. As I come back, I'm going to get a little bit darker because I'm coming into the foreground on a little bit darker mixture. A little bit darker, a little bit duller as I come back. So I want the area of interest to really pop out. Hmm. Now on this side, this will be in shadow, but this will be a little greenery over here also. But I'm just going to put a little bit of color here, just to remind me of some of the shapes. And this will be in shadow, so I'll cover this up with another color to put a shadow pattern on top of this. Oh, I also have a lot of green in the background. So in the background, I'm going to mix a dull, but it's got to be dark back there because that's around those bushes and everything, about around the interest of area. It's going to be dark. So I'm going to mix up a little bit darker green, and I'm making a mix here of green and blue, mixed in with a little bit of ultraviolet, quinacridone violet, a little bit of brown. So I'm mixing a real dark back here. And these dark colors of green and brown, quinacridone violet, a little bit of ultramarine blue, or to make those colors dark, because I want a dark area around the impact area, which was my lightest area. And so around that edge and around that background, I want to have dark. And that'll make that impact area really show off with that darker value in the background. And these background colors are dark, but also they're variable. I'm changing the colors from one color to another. I go back into the palette, pick up another color. I'm also working on the edges around that impact area, that little tree mass there, because next to the impact area I want that to show up as a little edge. So edges are very important here, and also a variation of the color to give me a nice contrast next to the impact area. Continuing on with changing colors. Painting in that dark area, which is a large mass area, which is dark. Right behind the middle ground, right ahead of the foreground. You know, this forward area here is going to be basically in shadow. It's also a fence. So I'll start getting a base coat down here of a color just to indicate a shape. Just blocking in colors, getting a little bit of shape here. And this tree, there's an old tree here, and I might put in some color here. Again, you won't be able to see too much of it. It's just happened to be in the landscape, and I wanted to indicate that there was a tree over here casting a shadow. So I want to just simulate the object over there. And on this side over here, now the sun is going to be coming from right to left. So this fence over here is going to be just a bit lighter. It's going to be a dull color, but I'm going to make it a little bit lighter than the one on the right because the sun is hitting this part of the fence over here. I'm painting a lighter value here on this side of the landscape. This part's in the sunlight, so it'll be a little bit lighter value. So here I'm conscious of the value and blocking in those colors. And in the shadow pattern, I'm just going to put down some color. It doesn't matter right now. I'm just going to put down some dark color. Now the shadow colors, I got mainly quinacridone violet and a little bit of blue, but a mixture of colors. And the shadow pattern really defines the foreground in front of the fence line there. But it'll give me a nice entrance into the painting and to give me a nice lead-in into the middle ground. Okay, now that's what I call the block-in stage. The block-in stage. I got the darks. They'll be darker when before I'm finished, but then I've got the values here going. So I got the lighter value here. It'll have to be darkened up a little bit more, taking you back into the impact area, which would be the lightest color. So I want the eye to go back here. I'm going to direct the eye to go back here because I'm making you follow the light going on there. So I'm going to let this dry. This is the what I call the blocking in phase of getting the large lights and darks established, and the large value masses, the lights and the darks. And I follow my value plan here that I drew out on the sketch, getting those values and shapes onto the watercolor paper. Number 14 round brush, which is a nice big round brush when it comes to a point, holbein synthetic hair. And I'm gonna add a little more darks in the background because I want to separate some of those shapes back there just a little bit around the impact area. So I'm mixing up a dark color here. I'm mixing up these darker colors and using the number 14 round brush. I'm going back in and I'm adding some definition back there in the background, putting in dark areas around some of those features to break up that large mass back there and to define some of the elements back there. There's a couple trees back there I'm trying to define. So I'm shaping those out with the dark area around a lighter area, trying to break up that background color mass. They give me a little definition, a little more interest there in the back, especially next to the impact area, which is where I want the emphasis to go. Here I'm cleaning up the edges around the impact area and also adding a little more interest here to the background, a little more definition of that tree mass. This is number 6 round, and I'm going to define the roof edge here. And I'm going to put a little bit of shadow under on the roof here to give a little definition. So this is the impact area, so I'm trying to build up a little more definition here. And I think the roadway, I'm also going to work on adding a little more more color. I'll go back to the half-inch flat brush, the holbein half-inch flat brush. Now I'm going to, first of all, I'm going to wet this road. I'm just going to wet it, put some water on it. And I'm going to pick up some of this road color, which was burnt sienna, mixed in with a little bit of yellow ochre, and gray it down, a little bit of and I'm going to put a darker value in there because I want that roadway to be less defined up here. Then I take the damp brush, and I want to smooth, not smooth, but I'm blending out the edges here of this value so that it gets lighter as I go back toward the impact area. Okay, now I got the paint dried. Now I'm going to go back in. I'm going to improve and work on the edges. And this little area right in here, this fence line, it's the value is very close to the impact area. So what I'm going to do is use the same colors here on the palette, but I'm going to make sure this is a dull color. Now this is important here. I'm using the colors now to go back to rework the edges between the background and the foreground. And this also will eliminate some of the white space that's left there that started. So by adding color here, cleaning up the edges, putting a little more value, a little more color, a little more contrast here between the background and the foreground, and to define that middle ground area a little bit better. But mainly what I'm doing is I'm cleaning up the edges, and I'm also eliminating the white paper that's showing between the areas. Here I'm adding a little color to the grass, again to give it a little darker value. A darker value in the foreground, and moving forward the grass gets lighter. Now I'm blending out that color with the original color that's on the paper. Blending it out with a damp brush. Now this area over here, I'm going to change brushes, make it a little bit bigger brush. I'm going to use a flat brush over here. This area here is going to be in shadow. So this area's got to be a little bit darker. Now I'm adding more color here on the right side. Again, eliminating that white paper that's showing on the edge. And also adding a little more value here, covering up this area, a little more color. A little more value. This is in shadow, so I'm putting more of a shadow color over the top of this area. And moving on down, I'm going to put some more color here in the foreground with that shadow pattern. Adding a darker color across the foreground to emphasize the shadow that's being cast from that tree there on the right. So this dark foreground will also help the viewer's eye go toward the middle ground, which is where I want the viewer to go. And here I'm using the 1/2" flat brush to cover the area a little bit faster. You're adding a shadow pattern to that fence line on the left, which is where the cast shadow is moving over to the left. Okay, I'm going to put some final touches, final details on the fine paint. This is a number 4 rigger, a Holbein synthetic brush, and it does very fine lines. I'm going to pick up some dark. Now I'm going back with the rigger brush. I'm going working into the impact area. I'm putting a little more definition, a little more detail, smaller marks with a brush. Cleaning up some of the white areas, dulling down a little area there, a little bush line. I'm dulling down the little white area, which is the curb side. Putting a little more color there to knock that color down. So I'm making everything a little bit duller here, except for the impact area. Now along the edge of that fence line, along the edge of the building there, I'm making a very dark value because I want that light to really pop out with a much darker color. And here I'm putting a little definition into the fence line, showing maybe some of the individual pieces of boards that are in the fence, just for a little definition. I'm mainly concentrating on the impact area. There I'm putting the trunk to that little tree there in front of the house. Cleaning up the edges. Here I'm putting another dark area in front of this fence so that the definition of the background and foreground is well defined. The lighter in front of the dark. And that completes a little color sketch I did. I think it really turned out nice. I'm going to give it a title, The Pathway to the Little Yellow House. And all the material on today's presentation are available at my website, everestwatercolors.com. Subscribe to my YouTube channel and select the bell to be notified of my next video. And give me a thumbs up, it helps my ratings. See you in the next video.